My name is Anna Williams, and I am 28 years old. A month ago, my 4-year-old daughter, Lily, passed away due to an unfortunate incident. Since then, my mental state has been in shambles. Every time I close my eyes, I am haunted by the scene. That day, Anna received a business trip assignment from her company and entrusted Lily to Mrs. Johnson's care. The trip was supposed to last only 4 days, but on the third day, she received a call from John Smith.
Anna, you need to come to the hospital immediately.
With a sense of foreboding, Anna booked the earliest flight. When she arrived at the hospital, the doctor had just come out of the operating room.
I'm sorry, we did our best. Please accept our condolences.
Anna stared blankly at John Smith as the doctor wheeled Lily out. She was covered with a white sheet, half of her face and her entire body in disarray. John Smith averted his eyes in distress and held Anna's hand.
Anna, please don't be too sad.
Anna snapped out of her daze, shook off his hand, and threw herself onto the emergency cart.
Lily, look at Mommy! Lily! Lily!
She gently touched Lily's face, but she remained unresponsive. Her heart felt increasingly hollow as she screamed and cried, losing control like a madwoman.
Anna, calm down! Lily is gone!
Her lips trembled uncontrollably as she looked at Lily, then at John Smith, her mind blank before she fainted. When Anna woke up again, it was dark, and the lights were dim. She sat up abruptly.
John, I had a nightmare. I dreamt about Lily.
Anna, this isn't a nightmare. It's all real.
What exactly happened?
Anna, Lily was too mischievous. Somehow, she climbed onto the windowsill, and the window was broken. I hadn't fixed it in time.
No! I don't believe it! I clearly left Lily with Mrs. Johnson. She promised to take good care of her. Where is Mrs. Johnson? Where did she go at such a critical moment?
Anna, calm down. Mrs. Johnson, she just turned away for a moment. It was too late.
Mrs. Johnson always resented Lily for being a girl. Did she not pay attention? Is this all her fault?
Enough! Anna! What did Mrs. Johnson do wrong? She just didn't notice. She's feeling guilty now, so she moved out, thinking she can't face you.
Anna looked at him in disbelief, as if she didn't recognize him.
Anna, I didn't mean to be harsh. We've already lost Lily. If Mrs. Johnson knew you were still blaming her, she might not be able to go on either. Do you have to lose more loved ones to be satisfied? Do you have to destroy this family to be content?
Anna covered her face, tears streaming uncontrollably. John Smith hugged her tightly, comforting her.
Anna, Mrs. Johnson is deeply remorseful. Even if you don't want to see her right now, please don't hurt her feelings, okay?
Anna nodded without speaking. In reality, she had no other choice. No matter how unwilling she was, Lily was gone, leaving only a cold, lifeless grave. Later, Anna often dreamed of Lily, crying and calling for her. She frequently woke up from these nightmares, feeling lost and anxious. She resigned from her job and confined herself at home, flipping through Lily's photos to get through each long day. One day, while browsing Lily's photos, Anna accidentally clicked on Weibo. She intended to exit, but the top trending topic caught her attention. Shocking! Live footage of a little girl. My hands trembled as I clicked on the link. The video was only 7 seconds long, shot from an angle below the building. In the third second of the video, a little girl fell from the window. As the video shook, everything became blurry.
At that moment, an unbearable pain gripped my heart, yet I numbly watched it over and over again.
By the 8th time, John Smith walked in. He saw me watching the video of Lily, his face changed, and he snatched the phone from me.
Anna, how many times do I have to tell you? Lily is gone. Can't you just move on?
But seeing my numb expression, his tone softened.
I know Lily's passing has hit you hard, but we can still have children. We'll always remember Lily fondly, okay?
He pulled me into his arms. I wanted to push him away but caught a whiff of his cologne. It was the birthday gift I bought him last year, which he had never used before. At the time, he had laughed and said that only women used cologne.
Lily's incident hadn't happened that long ago, and John usually looked exhausted at home because, unlike me, he hadn't given up his job. But now, for just a job, he used that cologne? Or did he use it to meet someone?
Lily had only been gone for a month.
The thought made my heart grow colder, but I didn't push him away. John, thinking he had comforted me, quickly went to bed. These days, he had gotten used to my late nights. Our schedules were no longer in sync.
Once I was sure he was asleep, I took his phone. At this point, I just wanted the truth. Lily's passing had made me indifferent to many things. If he really... I thought we should get a divorce.
I knew John's phone password, but this time it showed an incorrect password. Why did he change it? I bit my lip and carefully used his fingerprint to unlock it. The phone opened.
Almost simultaneously, a WeChat message came through.
Why are you taking so long? It's been so long. When are you going to marry me?
My heart sank, and I hurriedly opened WeChat. Her profile picture was a simple cartoon character, and the chat history had been deliberately deleted, leaving only this message.
The truth was clear. John had been unfaithful. Perhaps he hadn't asked for a divorce immediately out of consideration for my recent loss of Lily.
Just then, Emily Johnson sent another message.
Are you having second thoughts? Regretting what you did to your daughter? I told you clearly, I can accept remarriage, but I can't accept your child.
The revelation hit Anna like a cold wave, and she knew what she had to do next. The first time I felt the chilling sensation of falling into an ice cave, my heart grew cold rapidly, inch by inch.
I fell in love with John Smith when I was 20. We got married when I was 23 despite my parents' objections. They paid the down payment for our house since David's family wasn't well off.
From school uniforms to wedding dresses, I found my soulmate in college. I once thought I was the happiest woman in the world. But reality turned out to be cruel.
8 years of love. And what did I get in return? He harmed his own daughter just to be with another woman. Is he a beast? How could he be so heartless?
I clenched my fists secretly, looking at John Smith's face. He was vague about what happened that day. It was all lies. I wanted to end him, to avenge Lily, but I couldn't be impulsive.
My parents' health isn't good. The news of Lily's passing would devastate them. They only have one daughter, and I am their future support. I can disregard myself, but not them. However, John Smith must pay the price.
I set John Smith's WeChat notifications to unread and checked other messages. I found clues in his WeChat and Alipay transaction records. Since last year, he had frequently transferred money to an account. I also found that he had bought many expensive items sent to an address. The recipient was Jessica Brown. Additionally, I discovered John Smith's leave record for April 3rd. According to him, he was at work that day and only found out about the incident when Mrs. Johnson called him. This leave record was enough to overturn his lies to me.
Unfortunately, I discovered it too late. If I had called the police then, perhaps the truth could have been uncovered. But now, much evidence has been buried by him. I can only plan slowly.
I took photos of all the evidence and, after ensuring I left no trace, put his phone back in place. Lying beside him, listening to his even breathing, my desire for revenge grew stronger.
John Smith, you beast, you will not die a good death.
I thought of Lily, her disheveled body, covered in blood. Lily wearing the clothes I picked for her when she fell. Lily hugging my leg in her baby voice, asking if I could come back early. I don't know if the current evidence is enough to bring down David Smith. The next morning, after John Smith went to work, I also left the house and arranged an appointment with a well-reviewed lawyer online. Having not gone out for a whole month, I suddenly found the sunlight a bit glaring. But I did not shy away. At this moment, my desire for justice had surpassed everything else. The lawyer's name was Michael Davis, and he was quite renowned. To my surprise, he was much younger than I had imagined, only about 27 or 28 years old. Though not particularly striking in appearance, his eyes and brows exuded a certain warmth.
Please, have a seat. Can I get you some water?
Seeing me emotionally agitated and incoherent, he proactively poured me a glass of water. After I finished presenting all the evidence and speaking my mind, he shook his head.
You probably already guessed it, this evidence is not complete and could be easily overturned.
I had considered this, but hearing him say it still made my heart sink.
Forgive my boldness, but I happened to see the video circulating online.
I hadn't intentionally concealed anything when explaining the situation, so he combined what I said with the online video and asked a few questions. I looked at Michael Davis warily.
Don't misunderstand me. I just want to ask if you've considered investigating the people who were present that day.
Michael Davis's words gave me a new perspective, a sudden clarity. Yes, I shouldn't focus solely on John Smith. The chat records from that day already explained everything. There were others who knew about this, including Jessica Brown. And what about Mrs. Johnson, who was at home watching the child at the time? Could she really know nothing? After leaving the law firm, I didn't rush to find Mrs. Johnson but instead bought a set of cameras. I installed the cameras in hidden corners of the house and confirmed their audio recording capabilities. Not long after, John Smith came back. He looked exhausted again today, unaware that I had gone out during the day. As usual, he sat in the room looking at Lily's photos.
Are you hungry? I'll make dinner.
If I knew nothing, I might really think he was a good husband. That night, after he fell asleep, I closed my eyes as well. That night, I dreamed of Lily again. She clung to my leg, acting playfully and calling me Mom. But the beautiful scene shattered in an instant, replaced by the image of her lying in the hospital. Her face and body were covered in blood, no matter how much I tried to wipe it off. I woke up with a start.
And how many times have I told you, you need to look forward? When will you finally understand? Do you know how exhausting this is for me?
I pretended to feel guilty and lowered my head, apologizing. Despite this, he was still very unhappy and left the house early in the morning. I also went out, taking a taxi to Mrs. Johnson's house. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had divorced years ago due to emotional incompatibility, and as the only child, John Smith was very important to her. When I only had Lily, she urged me several times to have another child, preferably a boy, saying that only then would we have a real support. Since Lily's incident, she had returned to her hometown. According to John Smith, she felt guilty about Lily's accident and couldn't face me. However, as soon as I opened the door, I heard laughter from inside the house. Was this the remorseful Mrs. Johnson that John Smith had described? The one who was supposedly devastated and crying all the time? Mrs. Johnson heard the door open and came out to check.
Who's there?
Seeing Anna, she was taken aback at first, then gave an awkward smile.
Anna? What brings you here?
Mrs. Smith, I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused recently. I know you didn't want anything to happen to Lily either. I've just been so upset that I haven't come to see you. John told me you've been crying every day at home.
Mrs. Johnson was stunned. Anna looked inside the house.
Mrs. Smith, who were you talking to just now? Do we have a guest?
Without waiting for her to respond, Anna quickly walked into the house and met the gaze of the person inside. It was a very young girl, looking just over 20, with delicate features. However, Anna noticed her slightly rounded belly.
Anna, let me introduce you. This is my distant niece, Jessica Brown. Jessica, this is your sister-in-law.
The name slowly matched the records Anna had seen on Taba. She looked at Jessica, and Jessica looked back at her.
Mrs. Smith, why didn't you mention before that you had such a niece?
I just didn't get the chance to tell you.
Anna nodded, intending to ask more, but Jessica spoke first.
Sister-in-law, Aunt, I have something to attend to at home, so I'll be leaving now.
Jessica left in a hurry, and Mrs. Johnson and Anna fell into silence.
Mrs. Smith, I won't hide it from you. I came here to confirm something. On the day Lily had her accident, were you home the entire time?
Anna stared directly at Mrs. Johnson. Her expression turned a bit irritated, even angry.
Anna, are you doubting me? Of course, I didn't leave. I never expected that in just a moment, Lily would fall down the stairs.
Suddenly, Anna's heart sank. If she really hadn't left, how could she not know that John had acted? So there's only one possibility: she's lying too. Anna called John and told him she would stay there for a couple of days. In the evening, Mrs. Johnson arranged a room next to hers for Anna. She locked the door, took out her earphones, and accessed the home surveillance footage. On the footage, Anna saw John rushing home in the afternoon, and shortly after, another person arrived. It was Jessica Brown. As expected, her suspicions were confirmed.
John, I think she's already figured it out.
Impossible. I've hidden it well. She can't possibly know.
But I'm already 3 months along. I can't hide it much longer. When will you finally marry me?
Just wait a bit longer. Let's get through this period first. If I bring up divorce now, she'll definitely suspect something.
Jessica touched her slightly rounded belly.
Wait. I've waited for you so long. Isn't that enough? I had a friend check, and this baby is most likely a boy.
John hesitated for a long time, then finally gritted his teeth.
Do you think I don't want to leave her sooner? The down payment for this house was paid by her parents. If we divorce, she'll get at least half. I need to find.
After that, I didn't hear any more useful information. I released my tightly clenched hands, pulled off the headphones, and took deep breaths, trying to suppress my overwhelming resentment. Let's start by testing Mrs. Johnson. I went to the bathroom and used the prepared lemon water to write on the mirror. Then, I scratched my head and knocked on Mrs. Johnson's door.
What's the matter?
Mrs. Johnson opened the door, looking somewhat displeased.
Mrs. Smith. I just had a dream. I dreamt that Lily came back.
I suddenly grabbed her sleeve, my face pale.
Lily said she felt so wronged, she was unwilling to leave, she wants to come back.
After hearing my words, Mrs. Johnson's face turned grim.
It's just a dream, why make such a fuss? I think you've been too tired lately, that's why you're having these wild thoughts.
Is that so? Yes, Lily's passing was just an accident, how could she possibly want to come back?
I mumbled to myself, pretending to be frightened.
Mrs. Smith, can we sleep together tonight?
Mrs. Johnson was clearly reluctant, but I didn't wait for her answer and walked in. I lay on the bed, and Mrs. Johnson sighed, tidied up a bit, and went to take a shower. She showers every night around 8, and tonight was no exception. Once she was in the bathroom and I heard the water running, I walked barefoot to the door and locked it from the outside. I could almost imagine the scene that would follow. Mrs. Johnson was showering, steam rising, when she suddenly noticed something on the mirror. She glanced at it casually, and her pupils dilated in shock. "Grandma, I died so tragically." These blood-red words appeared right in front of her. The writing was crooked, the bloodstains long, slowly dripping.
Ah!
Mrs. Johnson screamed. At the same time, the lights went out. Mrs. Johnson panicked even more, screaming and shouting.
Anna. 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 What's wrong with the door? Why won't it open? Anna. Anna. Are you home?
The house was eerily quiet, no one responded to her. Mrs. Johnson became even more terrified, desperately banging on the door. Bang! Bang! Bang bang bang!
Ah!
Another scream. It seemed Mrs. Johnson had hit something and fell to the ground.
Lily. Lily, is that you? Lily, don't come after Grandma. Grandma burned a lot of paper money for you, ensuring you won't lack anything in your next life.
She kept muttering, as if begging for Lily's forgiveness. But then, a clear, crisp singing voice suddenly echoed. The moon moves through the clouds like white lotus flowers, the evening breeze brings waves of joyful songs.
Ah!
Mrs. Johnson recognized it, it was Lily's voice. The eerie voice continued. We sit by the tall haystacks, listening to Mom tell stories of the past. After Lily finished singing, she giggled and said,
I love Mom and Dad the most, and I also love Grandma and Grandpa. Lily's wish is for our family to always be together.
Lily's wish was for our family to always be together.
An ethereal voice echoed in the empty room, eerie and haunting.
Lily, please don't come for me. Grandma didn't do anything.
Mrs. Johnson wailed loudly, terrified and at a loss. She knew Lily had come for revenge, wanting to take her away. Suddenly, she heard scratching at the door, as if something was trying to break in.
Lily, Grandma is sorry, but Grandma had no choice. Your father said you had to go so that Jessica would agree to have a little brother. Didn't you always want a little brother?
I stood outside the door, hearing Mrs. Johnson's words clearly. Everything happening now was part of my plan. In all honesty, I didn't derive any pleasure from this, my heart only grew colder. It turned out, Mrs. Johnson was an accomplice too. I didn't turn on the power, numbly listening to the cries from the bathroom. The soundproofing here was decent, so I didn't worry about Mrs. Johnson alarming anyone. Unfortunately, she never revealed exactly what happened that day. That night, I listened to Mrs. Johnson's cries and stayed awake until dawn. When the sky began to lighten, Mrs. Johnson's voice finally stopped. After confirming her silence for a long time, I quietly turned the power back on and restored everything to its original state. Once I was sure there were no loose ends, I opened the bathroom door. Mrs. Johnson had already fainted. I gently shook her awake.
Mom, what's wrong?
Mrs. Johnson woke up, instinctively calling out.
Lily! Lily!
Mom, Lily is gone.
Mrs. Johnson suddenly became alert and pushed my hand away.
Anna, what happened to me? Where were you last night?
I was sleeping all night. When I got up this morning to wash up, I found you unconscious in the bathroom. Mom, have you been missing Lily too much lately?
Mrs. Johnson trembled unconsciously.
Anna, last night, did you hear any strange sounds?
As she spoke, she glanced at the mirror. However, the mirror was spotless, as if nothing had happened, as if last night was just a dream.
No, I had a rare good night's sleep.
Mrs. Johnson could only guiltily suppress the incident. I helped her up, and as she stood, her face twisted in pain.
My foot hurts.
We hurried to the hospital, where it was confirmed that Mrs. Johnson had sprained her ankle, resulting in a minor fracture. It wasn't serious, a cast and a few days of observation would suffice. John Smith came as soon as he heard the news, and Mrs. Johnson, in my presence, could only attribute it to an accident.
I'll stay and take care of Mrs. Johnson.
John Smith didn't think much of it and readily agreed. I sent the recording I obtained last night to Michael Davis. If things went smoothly, I could get even more compelling evidence. Michael Davis didn't know my plan, only reminding me to be cautious. The hospital wasn't as free, so I could only secretly watch the footage. Since I wasn't home, Jessica Brown openly moved in, taking over my bed. Seeing this, I couldn't help but sneer. On the 8th day of Mrs. Johnson's hospitalization, Jessica Brown became even more brazen, even coming to visit Mrs. Johnson. She wore exquisite makeup, looking even more beautiful than me. Mrs. Johnson glanced at me nervously, but I graciously peeled an apple for her. The other patients in the room couldn't understand the undercurrents between us, only marveling at what a good daughter-in-law Mrs. Johnson had. Soon, they were asking about how long I'd been married and whether I had children.
We've been married for 5 years, and we don't have children yet. But I'm planning to conceive soon. My mom has always wanted a chubby grandson.
I clearly noticed Jessica Brown's expression change. When she looked at me, her eyes were filled with hatred, even a hint of malice. Mrs. Johnson was discharged from the hospital, and I had been running errands all day. Under the guise of taking care of her, I kept a close watch on her every move.
John, Jessica came to see me. Did you go to the doctor again? Are you sure it's a boy?
Anna is great, but my first grandson is more important. When do you plan to get a divorce?
I leaned against the door, eavesdropping on their conversation. I had been with John Smith for 8 years. After we got married, my relationship with Mrs. Johnson had always been good. John had sworn to love only me forever, and Mrs. Johnson had promised to treat me like her own daughter. Even if promises are only believed by those who hear them, they shouldn't have schemed and caused the loss of my daughter. This family made me feel disgusted, truly disgusted. Once I was sure they had finished talking, I pushed the door open and went in. Mrs. Johnson hurriedly put away her phone, and I pretended not to notice anything, continuing to dutifully take care of her. The next evening, John Smith came to pick me up. He held my hand, but I hesitated and looked at Mrs. Johnson.
Mom's foot hasn't healed yet.
Anna, you should go home and rest for a couple of days. Don't worry about me, I'm much better now. If you're still concerned, you can come back in a few days.
I nodded, agreeing silently. On the way home, John Smith was driving, and I sat in the passenger seat. Suddenly, I remarked,
John, we've been together for 8 years, haven't we?
John's hand trembled slightly, and he replied in a low voice,
Yes, 8 years.
John, I've been thinking these past few days.
Neither of us wanted to lose Lily, but it happened. Just like you said, let's have another child and forget the pain of losing Lily, okay? John glanced at me during a red light, remaining silent. The house was eerily quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. The soft lighting masked the decay within. Even though this place was filled with hidden filth, I had to come back. Because there was still evidence here.
Anna, You should take your medication. The doctor said it will help you sleep better.
I hesitated for a moment, then swallowed the pills. It didn't take long before I felt drowsy. Slowly, I closed my eyes, still hearing John Smith's soft calls.
Anna? Anna?
Once he was sure I was asleep, he quietly left the room. As the door clicked shut, I opened my eyes. I bit the tip of my tongue, feeling a faint pain, but I ignored it. Carefully, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, opening it just a crack to eavesdrop on the conversation outside.
Yes, I brought her back, but now is not the time to act. If something happens to her right after she returns, won't that arouse suspicion?
John, it's not that I can't let her go. Think about all I've done for you. For you, I even gave up on Lily. Don't you trust me?
Jessica, to be honest, I want to tamper with her medication.
When the conversation turned into sweet nothings, I gently closed the door and returned to bed, pretending to be asleep. Much later, I heard John Smith return, smelling the faint scent of smoke on him. That night, I remained sleepless. The next morning, after John Smith left, I went to the study and turned on his computer. I rarely touched this computer, but this time, I had a special reason. I meticulously reviewed the details of the day Lily had her incident. Who had uploaded the video online? After Lily's incident, I received a lot of sympathy from people. But John Smith seemed to have perfectly avoided everyone's scrutiny. There were shockingly few eyewitnesses, and the video had appeared so conveniently. Soon, I found the person who had first uploaded the video. The IP address showed it was from my own home. Some evidence can be deleted or altered online. However, any interaction will inevitably leave traces. Without hesitation, I hired a computer expert. He did not disappoint me. After getting the computer, he extracted some useful evidence for me. I already knew who had posted the video using this computer. It was Jessica Brown. As the evidence was presented one by one, I called Michael Davis, my face turning pale. This evidence cut me to the core.
This is serious, Anna. Who could have done something like this?
I already know, Michael. It was Jessica Brown.
After reviewing the evidence, Michael Davis looked at me with a complex expression. I didn't care whether his gaze was one of sympathy or pity. I handed him Mrs. Johnson's recording as well.
Does this count as favorable evidence?
Very favorable.
He accompanied me to the police station, where I tried to remain calm and recounted everything in detail. After we provided the evidence, the police summoned Mrs. Johnson, John Smith, and Jessica Brown. During the interrogation, John Smith requested to see me, and I agreed. He was handcuffed to the table, his emotions running wild.
Anna, what madness are you up to?
Madness? You and Jessica Brown conspired to harm Lily, and you call me mad? If I were truly mad, I would be the first to seek justice for Lily.
How could you possibly know? It's impossible!
John Smith, good and evil, will always be repaid. Lily is watching you from above. You will pay the price.
Mrs. Johnson, who had been frightened by me before, had the weakest psychological defense. When she heard her own recording, she was the first to break down and confess, demanding to see me.
Anna, we wronged you.
Save those words for Lily. I will never forgive you.
Jessica was expecting a boy, and she said, if Lily were still around, she would rather not have the child. We truly know we were wrong. Please, have mercy on us.
Save those words for Lily. I will never forgive you.
With that, I left. As for meeting Jessica Brown, I chose to refuse. The case was eventually handed over to the court. Time passed, and the trial began. Michael Davis attended as my lawyer. Mrs. Johnson wailed and pleaded from the defendant's seat, while John Smith and Jessica Brown looked at me with ashen faces. They knew well that I would not let them go. To reduce their sentences, they could only turn against each other. Their familial bonds and affection shattered in that moment. Everything had gone smoothly, and I was just waiting for the final court decision. After leaving the courthouse, Michael Davis spoke up.
Let me treat you to a cup of tea.
With the dust settled, I felt much better.
It should be my treat.
We found a tea house and booked a private room. Michael poured tea for me and leaned forward with a thoughtful look.
What are your thoughts now?
I sighed deeply, the weight of the past months still heavy on my heart.
When I found out that Lily's passing wasn't an accident, I swore to seek justice for her, no matter the cost.
Now that you've achieved it, I believe the journey was tough. But I'm curious, did you ever waver?
I shook my head, unwavering in my resolve.
As a mother, how could I not seek the truth for my child?
Michael smiled and leaned back, a story forming in his eyes.
Let me tell you a story.
His story was simple yet poignant.
A family of 3 lived happily together, but the good times didn't last. The husband had an affair with a young, beautiful woman and often mistreated his wife and child. The mother considered leaving, but she couldn't escape his control. In the end, for the sake of her son, she chose to endure the humiliation. As the son grew older, he gradually gained the ability to stand up for his mother. However, the mother, worn down by years of hardship, passed away early. On her deathbed, she was still worried about her son and gave him many instructions.
I felt a pang of sorrow for the mother in Michael's story.
This mother was very noble.
Michael sighed deeply, a shadow passing over his face.
Yes, she even told her son before she passed to live well, even if he was alone.
I gave a self-deprecating smile, feeling the weight of his words.
Living well, it's so difficult.
Michael leaned forward, his eyes earnest.
But speaking of this, I still want to thank you. Your story has given me a lot of insight.
I realized that Michael might be the child in the story, trying to console me.
Thank you, not only for your meticulous care and defense, but also for your support that went far beyond a lawyer's duty.
Michael shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips.
There's no need to thank me. My mother once told me something, and I want to share it with you. Passing away doesn't mean the end. As long as you remember someone, they will always live on. Lily will live in your heart, by your side, and in your future. So, don't be afraid. Look ahead. Whether for her or for yourself, you must live well.
I felt a warmth spreading through my chest, his words giving me strength.
Thank you, I will.
Michael smiled gently and asked,
That's good. Do you have any plans for the future?
I was about to say no, but then I thought of my parents. They still didn't know about Lily. They watched me leave time and again, waiting for me to come home. Thinking of this, tears quietly rolled down my cheeks.
I want to go home.
After all the twists and turns, I finally understood a truth. Home is where my parents are.